Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll discuss this Bava daf Ayin Vav. We are going to begin at the very top of Ayin Vav Amud Aleph by the two dots. Quoting the Mishnah, Ganav v'hikdish v'yachach tavach u'machar b'chulu. So the Mishnah says a whole list of different situations, and one of them is, let's say a person stole, and then you're a makdish it, and then after you're a makdish it already, which technically it's not yours, and then you slaughtered or sold it. So the din is, as the Mishnah says, Misham Tashmi Kefel, because you stole it, so you definitely pay Kefel, but you don't pay the Dal Dehay. Now Shimon makes a distinction. He says, if we're dealing with Kedoshim Shechah Be'acharusam, like for example a neder, which you'd have to replace if it gets lost or stolen, then you would have to pay Dal Dehay, because you do have some connection to it. But if it's not Chai B'acharayis, like for example in the Dava, you said like Harizu, so if you lose it, so then you don't have to replace it, so then you would not have to pay Dal Dehay. So that's his sheet. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. So Amri, Bishlama Atvicha Lo Machayev. So again, what happened? He stole it, he was mocked this shit, and then all of a sudden he shechs it, so he doesn't pay the Dal Dehay according to the Chacham. Now, I can understand why Lo Machayev Dechi Katavach, because when he shechted the Hektish Katavach, he shechted that of Hektish, Vodamari Katavach. It's not his. Okay, so let's stop for 1 second. It says Rashi, Dali Bul Achar Yish Kamrinan. We're talking about that the owner already gave up hope, and therefore there was already Yish. The Lifnei Yish, if it was not, it was before Yish, Lo Kidsha. He wouldn't have the ability to be makdish it, because it's not his to be makdish. So it must be that the Baal was miyayish, and therefore the Ganav took upon himself some bailus over here to be able to be makdish it. Kivan diyayish kani hektish beyish v'shin rishus hilkach lav demari katavach. So therefore, once you give it over, so now there's yish and shin rishus, so it's given over to hektish, and therefore I can understand why you're put from dal behay. Back in the Gemara, ela hektish l'chayiv. A hektish l'chayev mali machar l'hedjit mali machar l'shamayim. How do we understand? Okay, fine. Again, that when you shechted it to hektish, it was already belonged to them, and it wasn't the owners. However, a hektish l'chayev l'chayev, you should still have to pay hektish if, let's say, you sold it. So what's the difference if you sold it to a hedjit or you sold it to the shamayim, right? So it's talking about you sold it. So how many Rav Shimon the ever kadashim shecham yacharusam rishus the mori kaima. So this is talking about Rav Shimon, says Rashi. Gain the oimer hari olai oila. You made it as a neder upon yourself. The hifresh genevazu lenidroi, and you're mafresh this geneva for your neder. Kivan decham yacharuso v'davar hagarma mamon hu kimamon dami v'lav machirohi. It isn't considered like a mechira since he's chayiv for it even after he's makdish it. So it's like it's still his. So he was not able to really sell it. So it's an interesting svar. So that's what it's talking about. It's dafka in the case of kachim shechayav yacharusam, the reshus the mari kaima. Since he still has an obligation, if it gets lost or stolen, it's like it's his, and therefore it's not a sale. I have in a seifa Rav Shimon Havi Rav Shimon la Rav Shimon. You can't say it's like Rav Shimon because Rav Shimon is already quoted in our Mishnah, as we just said. So obviously the Tanakhama's statement cannot be like Rav Shimon because why would he get his name being mentioned there? We're talking about Kadashim Kalim, that you remark this shit for, let's say, covering Shlomim, and it's according to the Shita of Rav Yosef Glili, which we've seen on Daf Yud Beis in the first parak of this Masechta, that the Omer, again, he says Kashim Baalam is Momen Baalam, who belongs to you. And therefore, says Rashi, Hilkach La Machirahi. It's not considered to be a sale. And therefore, back in the Gemara, your Rishus Kaim, it's in your Rishus. What do you want to tell me when it comes to, let's say, for example, a carbon oila? The Tanakhama would hold like that you would actually have to pay Dal V'Hei. So the tiny ratio Hikdish. Why does the ratio mention this case that you stole it, slaughtered it, and then afterwards you're makdish it, you pay dal mishlam tashim lehay because you shechted it before you were makdish it. So why do you mention that case? Why don't you mention it in the case itself? When it talks about where you stole it, you were makdish it, then you shechted it or sold it. And you can say sometimes you're chayav in dal behan, sometimes you're not. Even in that case, medavar more b'kadashim kalam you're chayav that you would b'kadashim kalam that rather you're potter because it's not a mechira. Of b'kadashim kadshi kadashim misham tashim b'chamisha. El oilam loshna kadshi kadashim loshna kadashim kalam. It would have made sense if in fact there was a difference that there would have been mentioned as that distinction. So it must be there's really no difference. How is it any different of a mechira? When you sold something from a hedyed, mikara Torah de Ruvain v'hashta Torah de Shimon. So once it's transferred over from one person to the next. If you sell it to hektish, mikara Torah de Ruvain v'hashta Torah de Ruvain. It was Reuven's and it still is Reuven's. It's not a mechira, as we said, because. So let's look at Rashi. Why? Machla hedjet mikar to the Reuven. Kaidim shemacharu. Before he sells it, kari hashor al shemoi shel ganav. It's on the name of the ganav. Ukshemacharu. When he sells it, kari al shem loikeach. It's the name of the buyer. Rabbi Machla shemayim. When you sell it to the shemayim, a dayan shem hamakdishu olav. Shikari oyulasa shel ploini. They still call it the ola of so and so, and therefore it's not considered to be a mechira to be chayv in dalid v'hei. Question 3. Gun of the haim. This yaisho abailim yachach hekdisha hagana l'mizbeach. So you stole it. There was yish bailim, and then you were makdish it to the mizbeach. He'im mischayev dalid v'hei al hektish k'mechira. So the fact that you were makdish it, so this is not that you sold it, but by being makdish it, it's comparable to a mechira, because a mechira, you're transferring ownership from one person to the next. So by you being makdish something, it's also being transferring of ownership from one person to the next. So that's why we're saying that maybe in the case where you're makdish it, you should be chayiv dal dehei, because it's like a mechira. So the answer is it's not a mechira, because by a regular mechira, from a hedjit, it's transferred from, it's not his anymore, it's yours. The transference of title and ownership. However, when it comes to hektish, it still has that link, that connection to that person's name. So we don't have to say it's talking about Kadashim Kalam like Rabbi Yosef Glili. We don't have to say it's talking about the case of Chaim Yacharusan like Rabbi Shimon. Fine. So question 3 says as follows. In hektish k'mechira. The shani mechira the nafgul gamrim mabalim. It's completely gone from the owner's domain and ownership. Of a hektish adain tordi day mikri the zehu karbonai. So it's still considered like this person's carbon. Okay. Weiter. So again, the key element of this piece is that when it says you stole it and then you were makdish it, so we're saying that being makdish it, it's ki'ilu like a mechira, but it's not true. It's not like a mechira. So that's how we understand it. So again, when it comes to the shechting, I can understand because what happened? You stole it and you're makdish it, and then he shechted it. So it's not his because it belongs to hektish. So you're not chayiv for that tficha. But the question is, if we're just talking about it as a mechira, that the hektish giving over the hektish is like a mechira, so you should be chayiv dal behave for that. The answer is it's not considered like a mechira. Shimon Omer b'chulu. So Shimon again makes a distinction between kodshim or karbonos, which are chai b'acharusan. Therefore, it's not. It's like you still have ownership over it. It's like there was no transference. The hektish is not like a mechira because you still have a connection to it. So Amri Nehi the Sabar Shimon Malamachla Hedimachla Shemayim. I can understand how Rav Shimon doesn't make a distinction between the two. So the Havamina is that Rav Shimon is going on the act of being makdish, the animal, whether this act has a din machira. So it should be the other way around. The Kadashim Shachai B'Acharyusan Potter. Why? The Yakatu nothing Mershuse. So you should say maybe the other way around. If it's under Shus Chayav B'Acharayus, you should be Potter because it hasn't left your Rishus. So therefore it's not like a mechira, because you still have to pay for it if it gets lost. It should be considered to be like a good mechira. Giving over to hektish is like a mechira, and there, because at that point, once it's given over, you don't have any achrayas on it, so it's like a complete transference of ownership. That's how it should say it that way. So I'm Rav Shimon a milsa achriti koi. No, when Rav Shimon said his din of being mechalik when it came to being chayv achrayas or not, it's going on something totally different. A milsa achriti koi, v'hachi katani. This is how you read it. Now we know that a ganav who steals, so he has to pay kefil, he has to pay dal v'hei. But if you have a ganav, achar ganav, so the second person, it says v'gunim bebeis ish, v'lum bebeis ganav, and therefore he's not going to be chayiv. Now that's the din. V'chein and furthermore, and also. And this is the key line, Goiniv hektish mebeis baal potter. If you stole hektish and it was in the owner's domain, in this situation, you're going to be potter. So my taima, v'gunim mebeis ish mebeis hektish. The only time you're chayiv kefil or dal v'hei is if you steal it from an owner, not if it belongs to hektish. And on that, Shimon Omer no. Kadashim shechai b'acharusa and chayiv. If you stole from someone, which was hektish, was in their house, something which is chayim b'achrayis, you do have to pay down the hay. Because my taima, kreen be'v'gun mebeis ish, because it's still considered like mebeis ish, because now that you stole something which is chayim b'achrayis, that person is now going to have to get a new one. He'll have to pay for a new one. So therefore, it's considered to be like it's still mebeis ish, and therefore you're chayiv kefil for stealing it. Sheno chayim b'achrayis and potter don't kreen be'v'gun mebeis ish. So michti shamin le Rav Shimon diyar meshchita shena royal shmei shchita. We know, as we've seen elsewhere, that he says that if you shech something which is not fit for eating, so it's not considered to be a shchita, and therefore you're not chayav al dehei. Even though it looks like you did the shchita, you did a ma'aseh shchita, but if let's say it's something which is, let's say l'mashal aser b'hana, so then it's not considered to be a shchita. So if that's the case, so if you took an animal and you were makdish it, and then you shechted it, so that's kadashim nami shchita shena royahi. So that shouldn't work. You shouldn't be chayiv. Says Rashi, the kadashim hanishchatim b'chutz psuan. If you shechted b'chutz, assuming that's what you did, it's apostle carbon, and you can't eat it. So in my time, it says Rashi, Rav Shimon di Amar kadashim shachar b'achus and chayiv. Why would you be chayiv if a ganav stole this from a person's house and then shechted it, but at this point the din is it's shchita sheina roya. The mashma the im ganav kadashim. If he stole it, the tavchan the chayim tashum midal the hay. But why would he be? I thought he holds shchita sheina roya lo shmo shchita. So kiyas Rav Dimi Yom Rav Yochanan b'sheichet tamimim mibifnim l'shem ba'ilim. Now actually, what happened was he actually shechted it inside the Azara, in the base of Mikdash, l'shem ba'ilim, so it was an absolutely acceptable carbon. Why do we have to say that? Because it becomes a shchita, which is a shchita ruya. It's a shchita ruya, and therefore it's a shchita. And therefore, because of that, that's the reason why it's shaykh that you can be chayav dal v'hei. So, Bahari chazara karen lo ba'ilim, says Rashi, Bahari chazara karen lo bayis, hoyel l'shem ba'ilim nizbachu. So he should return the karen to the baal bias because he didn't l'shem the baal. So why should he be chayav again dal v'hei and everything? That's it. He should just return the animal that he shechted to the baal. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rabin shenishbach hadam. Somewhat where, unfortunately, even though he did the good shechita, but then the blood spilled. It says Rashi, umiyu b'shas shechita royehi. It's only an issue if it's a shechita at the zman of the shechita. The ma'aseh shechita has to be shechita roya. So it was just only afterwards the blood spilled, and therefore because that now the carbon cannot be eaten, and therefore you can't just simply give that to the Baal. Therefore, because you messed up in the avoda, so therefore you have to you're chayav more than just returning the object. That's answer number 1. Kiyas Rabin Am Rav Yochanan b'sheichet tamimim bifnim. You shechted a carbon tamim bifnim. However, shelo l'shem bailim. It was not for the sake of the Baal. Says Rashi, the shchita ruihi. The fact that you shechted it properly in the right place, so it's the shchita rui. But you didn't do l'shem baalim, actually. And therefore, as the Gemara in Zvachim says, kol zvachim shnizbechu shlo shmon, sharon. It's actually a good carbon. The karen l'chazul baalim. You don't return you can't give it to the Baal, the kaimelon shlo baalim m'shem chayvam, because since it was shlo l'shma, it didn't work. However, again, it's still considered to be a shechita ruya. As we continue to ayin vav amid beis, and we can glance at one of the shorter dafim, we'll see tomorrow, which is a little bit of a bonus. There's Shimon Oimer, a third answer, B'sheichen bali mumin b'chutz. They shechted a bal mum, which is not redeemed, and he did it outside. Says Rashi, shechitasan heter b'chutz. So it's not considered to be, again, a shechita sheina ruya. So let's look at question 4. Shimon Omer, Kadashim shechab yachrusim misham tashmin al hey, kashim emanashach, im shacht b'chutz, har shechita sheina ruya. If you shech the carbon outside. V'im shacht mifnim, if you did it inside, chazer karen eitzel habalim, just to give the karen, the animal, to the Baal. So the 3 answers were that 2 of the first ones, it was shechted inside, either the blood spilled, or they shechted it not for the shem balim. Therefore, as the din is, we say shlo olo bal m'shem chayva, or it's actually done outside. We're talking about a balmum, which was allowed to be shechted outside. Okay, which is the same question as question TB5. So let's just make a note of that. Kate said, Rav Shim Kadashim Shechai B'Acharusin Chayev Al Tvicha Dal V'Helo Shchitasai, the Shchita Sheina Ruya L'Shma Shchita. So I wrote Shachat B'Fnim L'Shem Balim V'Nishbach Adam, Shachat B'Fnim Shlo L'Shem Balim, Reish Lakish Shachat Balim Mumin B'Chutz. So that's TB5. So let me just make a mark over there, TB5 and TB5. Okay, well, let's not stop there. Let's look at question 5, which I think we also did. So let's look at question 5. Well, my hilchasa. Okay, we didn't do this yet. Okay, we'll maybe touch upon that. Let's keep going. So we're now on ayin vav amid beis. Tehebo Rabbi Lezer or Rabbi Yochanan. So he asked a question to Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan gave the answer of you shechted tamimim bifnim b'uz shloshim ba'ila. So, and therefore it's a shchita ruya. So he asked the question. Shchita materes, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the shchita should mater. Valo zrika materes. What are you talking about? It's the zrika that's the mater. So I understand the fact that he did the shchita properly, but we care about the zrika, not the shchita. So, and Reish Lakish, who was the third answer about the balmum b'chutz, shchita materes v'lo pidiyah materes. It's not the shchita that matters; it's the pidyon, right? Again, this is referring to you shechted a balmum outside without pidyon. So it's the pidyon that to be pointed is the main thing. So ishtamite hadu Rav Shimon, they forgot that which Rav Shimon said, which is kol oimid blizroi kazar dami. Anything which is fit to be sprinkled is ki'u like it was sprinkled. And therefore, what does that mean? It means that as long as the shechita was done properly, it's considered to be a good carbon that was done. It was a shechita ruya. And if it's spilled, but it's ki'ilu, since at that moment it was a shechita, and it was fit for the zrika to take place, so therefore it's ki'ilu like the zrika. The whole oimin liftos kapadei dami. Also, when it comes to the balmum animal that was shechted b'chutz, the fact is, even though you didn't redeem it, but since you could redeem it, it's like you did. So kol medlizer kazar dami. How do we see that? The sign of Shimon Omer yesh noiser shehu metami tumas oichlin. Yesh noiser shehu metami tumas oichlin. So when it comes to noisar, which has to do with a carbon, which different carbonos have different lengths of time that a person is allowed to eat it, and then afterwards any leftovers is called noisar. So there's some times that food of that carbon is matami tumas oichlin, sometimes it's not, says Rashi. Rav Shimon, Isuri hana, when it comes to something which is asma hana, a matamin tumas oichlin. He holds things that are tame, which have no benefit, cannot become tame tumas oichlin. The darish mikol oicha she'yachel, it's an oicha she'ati yachel achilo acherim, or nachri or Yisrael kari oicha. It has to be some type of a food that can be given to others, as opposed to something which is asma hana. And therefore, anything which is asma hana, according to him, there's no din tumas oichlin. And this is brought down in the first parak in Bechayros. It says Rashi, "V'im haisel lo shas heter hana." If there was one moment that it was mutter, mishenishchata, from the time it was shechted, yardul of din kabbalas tuma. It has a din of tuma. Yafilu neser lachin. If it became afterwards immediately aser, mikabelas tuma. It's still shech to be mikabel tuma. So, in order for something to be mikabel tuma, it cannot be aser b'hana. But if it had a shasa kaisher, then it's allowed. Why? Because kol oimed lizroik is kazar dami, even though it wasn't done, but since it could have been done, therefore it's like it was done. So ketzad, lon lifnei zrika. Let's say you left it, you didn't do the zrika, so it became puzzle. And the reason why it will not become a tamid tumas oichlin is because it was never had a shas heter, because it's only mutter when the zrika takes place. So if it was done with nezrika, it's not matamid tumas oichlin because there was never a moment that it was mutter. Well, achar zrika, but if let's say after the zrika was done, which means that at that moment it becomes mutter, there was a shasa kaisher, and then later on it became nicer, so it's matamid tumas oichlin. The karmelon, my lifnei zrika, what does it mean lifnei zrika? Before it was sprinkled, it means kaidim shenirul zrika, before it was fit to be sprinkled. Well, achar zrika is achar shenirul zrika. That's all it means. So kaidim shenirul zrika, one maihi. What exactly is that talking about? That before you were even able to sprinkle it. So maihi the loy havi shoyis b'yoyim lemizrke. The shachte samach shkei sachama. The matamid tumas oichlin. So if you shechted it 1 split second before shkia, you can't do zrika. The avoda cannot be done b'layla, has to be done during the day. So if you did the shchita a second before nighttime, so then you can't, it was never shayach for you to have been able to have done the zrika. And therefore, it was always asur b'hana. There was never a shasa kaisher, and therefore that's the reason why it's tamei. It's not going to be tamei tumas oichlin. However, la'achar shenir l'zrika, one, the havi shayis b'yoyim l'mizrika, let's say you did it at 2 p.m, you had a few hours to do it, even if you didn't, tamei tumas oichlin. Why? Why is it tamei tumas oichlin? You didn't do the zrika. Alma kol em l'lizroik kizarg dami, because we see this principle, which is actually, we're going to stop at that point. We'll see kol em liftos kapadoi dami, or remind of the tomorrow's daf. If I do this, we're going to finish the next daf, so I can't go any further. Okay, so let's look at question 5. So what do we learn out from Shimon like this? First of all, if ganav kachim and base bailim, if let's say a person he stole kachim from someone else's house, havile shchita roya, it's considered to be a fit shchita. Yishum de'oimid lizroik, because even though zrika didn't take place, but there was a shasa kaisha for the zrika to have done, and therefore, even though let's say the blood spilled, it doesn't matter because it was oimid lizroik. Also, by the din of nicer, if shahaya shayis beyoyim lizroik adam, you had time to sprinkle the blood. Havili ka'oichel, it's like food. Even though in reality, since you didn't end up doing the zrika, it was never really mutter bahana, and therefore you should think it's not matamid tumas oichlin. It's not considered like a food, but it is considered it because at a moment that it had the potential of being sprinkled, we say that is the din, and therefore it will take upon itself tumas oichlin. Question TA4: Lon kaidim zrika. So this is what we're saying, that if it was fit to sprinkle, there was time, there was a shasa kaisher, then it will have tumas oichlin. If there was not fit to sprinkle, for example, it was samach shkei sachama, so then the din is it will not. So that's TA 4, which is pretty much the same thing as what we saw in question 5. And again, we're going to stop there, but let's see, maybe we have TB 6. Madin Treifel in Tficha Mechira. Okay. Yeah, we'll see that tomorrow's daf. And let's see maybe a question or two from Rabbi Gibber. Umaskanos HaGemara. Shigan Beganav Hikdish Shaloi Deloi Mechayev Mishum Hektish Dalad Vehei Amai Mali Machlo Hedim Mali Machlo Shemayim. So there's a difference by a hedget. Originally it was Reuven, now it's Shimon's, but by Meichel Shemayim it was originally Reuven's and now it's still Reuven's. Okay. Hagoynev Hektish Mebeis Bailim Dechayev Rav Shimon Mishum Geneva V'Dalad Vehei V'Loid Havishchita Shein Ruya Im Shachta B'Chutz Im Shachta B'Fnim Hari Chazak and Labalim. So I wrote Yushachta Tamim in Bifnim for L'Shem Bailim, but you poured the blood. You like it spilled, I should say. You shecht a Tamim in Bifnim, not for L'Shem Bailim. You shecht B'chutz a Balmum. Question 14. Lefi Rav Shimon, Matai Matami Noiser Mishum Tumas Oichlin. So I wrote when it's fit for Zrika, namely there is time in the day. Adkan.